in just a lot of untapped potential in adding shooting sports to normal uh, not gymnastics, normal Winter Olympic sports. We're
Yeah.
live, guys. It is Tuesday, February 10th, the year of our Lord 2026, and I woke up this morning at 2:55 a.m. and because I'm jet lagged and my mind is very full, and I forced myself to go back to sleep until 4, but I have been lying in bed for the last 4 hours sipping coffee and editing stuff. Oh my. Wait, show it again.
It says too long dog.
It's yeah, that is a dog that is too long. And I am wearing a sloth shirt today because I am slowly easing myself back into dog shirt territory. The sloth shirt is an honorary dog shirt, and folks, uh, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It's gonna be a great fucking day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV. It is a goddamn revolution in morning television, and we have today one of the very few guests who always wears a dog shirt on Dog Shirt TV, which I think is the standard that everybody who hears on this show needs to follow. And I invited Emily Hoge on the show because today, I mean, she's welcome anytime. She's really gonna, I think I might add her to the co-hosts listserv. But I invited her on the show today for a very specific reason, which is that I had a non-war related experience in Kharkiv, uh, prompted by the very estimable Jimmy Rushton, who was on the show last week, that made me rethink something I have never thought about I've just never questioned, which is that all Soviet architecture is awful. And um, and when we were driving to Kharkiv, Jimmy was making the case for the fact that there is actually some really cool Soviet architecture. And I was sitting in the car being quietly dismissive of this because my loathing of the Soviet Union is, uh, the kind of thing that I just can't overstate. And with certain very limited exceptions, like uh, ballet, chess, and certain orchestral stuff. It is not and there's some obviously great pianists and whatnot. It is not a period of cultural expression that I am generally admiring of, except in the dissident form, which some of the dissident expression is amazing, but the official, tolerated, encouraged stuff is generally pretty abominable, and I had just kind of internalized in my little head that that included all buildings that were allowed to be built. And Jimmy tried to talk me out of it and tried to argue that all through Soviet history, there were these interesting movements that in architecture that within the parameters of Soviet building rules were actually pretty cool and interesting, and that Kharkiv has all of them. And so I was interested as I went through my tour of Kharkiv, which really was about other things. It was about buildings getting blown up, but just to notice, hey, is Jimmy right that there's actually some interesting Soviet architecture from all these different periods? And I was dismayed to find myself pretty persuaded on this point. Most Soviet architecture, particularly of the residential variety, is abominable and horrible, and soul-sucking. But there are these movements in it that are kind of interesting. And so I thought, who do I know who's kind of an enthusiast of Soviet era aesthetics in a not entirely but mostly ironic way, and who's not an apologist for Stalinism, because I don't have apologists for Stalinism on the show, but who could kind of talk to me about what is going on in some of these movements. And I thought, I know exactly the person, because when I sent her and the my Kharkiv photo essay, the first line I got back was something like "much love for Kharkiv aesthetic vibe," and I thought, this is the person I want to talk to about my reevaluation of some, not much, but some Soviet architecture. So I know you expect that you're only hearing from Emily Hoge when there are Russian mobsters to talk about. Nobody is going to get shot to death in the Tiergarten or murdered brutally on the show today. We are going to talk about buildings, and we might talk about some other stuff too. I'm not really sure, all of which is a 7 minute long way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore. We are allowed to have Emily Hoge back on the show. Emily, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I do want to pitch as an artistic output of the Soviet Union, Soviet film. Also very good.
Some of it.
Some of it is boring, but a
Yeah.
lot of it is good.
Yeah, no, there is good Soviet film. Look, they were technically proficient at a lot of things. And um there's also some great Soviet era fiction, although
There's
they
some very bad Soviet era fiction too.
yes, although I mean, they suppressed a lot of it, of course, right? Like, and so it sort of depends. Do you count the great dissident Soviet era stuff um, as uh, Soviet era because it was produced during the Soviet era, or do you consider it something else because it was not the regime? It was done, in defiance of the regime. So yeah, it's a complicated question. I will confess I have always thought of the architecture as pretty uniformly awful. And I was surprised at how mesmerizing I found some of these buildings. So, um, what is your rubric for thinking about Soviet architecture?
I mean, I would say that I feel that I'm gonna advocate for the ugly stuff too. because
This is not where I thought we were going to go with this.
because some of the ugly stuff. So I mean, in the post-war era under Khrushchev and then some also under Brezhnev, they were building a ton of housing for a lot of people, and that, as a renter, is the thing that I'm really in favor of. So when I look at sort of a lot of those, I mean, they were built quickly, they were built cheaply, they are not well maintained, and so they do look pretty ugly, but they are also tons and tons of housing with often there's like a park, there's there's a kindergarten, there's a playground, there's a grocery store, and all of that is sort of part of this enormous building project that I think is kind of just like, you can think of it as like the 5/1 of the Soviet Union. Like a lot of the time when you look at those here, they're kind of ugly, but that's the kind of place I live in.
Right. So,
So I
like,
like them a lot. And honestly, the high rises, I think, if you look at them, if they are not gross, which they often are because of like air conditioning units that like drip down them and like poor maintenance and things like that, they are sort of, I think a lot of the time things that look kind of brutalist, people think of them as cheap and easy to maintain, and so they treat them as cheap and easy to maintain, and they are in fact some of the hardest buildings to maintain. Like a brutalist building has to be carefully maintained to be beautiful, but when they are that, they are very beautiful.
All right, so I want to resist the defense of the Soviet apartment block. Um, I agree with
It's a
you.
hot take, yeah.
I agree with you that they were when they were built highly functional.
Yeah,
They are
less so
not
now.
they are not today highly functional. Judging from the difficulty of keeping them warm, of course they weren't designed for being shelled, but they are. There's um, uh, there is a uniformity to them. There is I mean, imagine whole cities made up of the FBI building. And I hate the FBI building. I think I only love one brutalist building, which is
Which one?
The Hirshhorn,
Oh, yeah.
which is a wonderful
What
building. But
about the metro? I
yeah,
love the
I like the
metro.
metro. It's
It's
not
so
really a
beautiful.
building, but I do like the metro. Look, poured concrete is a cool building material, and I'm not but something about building only with it for entire neighborhoods and then not maintaining stuff and not modernizing stuff. And so you have people living um in these incredibly monochrome um 50s, 60s, and 70s era blocks. And I don't have a lot of like nothing about that aesthetic appeals to me at all. And I do think there are places in the world that in the same time period, facing the same pressures, um, built much better residential housing for large numbers of people. So, I'm not in deeply in love with the aesthetic of Tel Aviv, but it's a similar problem that they dealt with, and it's much prettier than, um, you know. And I also think there's, uh, you know, but I take your point that they had a shitload to do in terms of putting people in housing, in modern-ish housing, um, uh, which of course they would have had less to do if they hadn't uh, if they hadn't been so careless about letting their own cities be destroyed during the war. But oh well.
A lot of building
Um,
to do. Yeah.
yeah, they had a lot of building to do, and some of that was their own fault. But that said, I don't think they did a particularly good job with it. Um, I do think some of the 1920s buildings are kind of amazing. And
Yeah.
so this
That's
was
the best era, yes.
this was the part. So I had never really I'm not sure if I'd never known about the Dershprom building in Kharkiv or if I'd just never thought about it. But so I'm going to post some pictures of it here. And actually have to say I found it completely mesmerizing. So this is 1928. It is considered the first skyscraper in the Soviet Union. It is immense. And it's so big that I could not fit it in my frame um, on any of the cameras that I had present, um, from without, walking a long way back. I'm trying to find it now. Um, it's an immense building, mostly ground, in just the ground level that it occupies, and it did not strike me as so let me see if I can do a decent screen share here without, as I have done too often, sharing way too much personal information. Okay, this should be good. Um, okay, can you see that? Yeah. So this is about, I don't know, 2/3 of the building. Um, and this is, of course, the portion of it that has been hit by Shahed's missiles. So the stuff that looks like gold instead of windows is actually plywood, and that is damage to the building. But for now, forget the damage because we're not talking about the war here. We're talking about the building. Um, I was super impressed by this. And again, not beautiful, but super interesting, which a lot of, you know, stuff was not. What do we know about this period of 1920s modernism in Soviet architecture?
I mean, so constructivist architecture, a lot of the time, they aren't building as high as they start doing later. So this is sort of late in that when they're starting to go up, which is often kind of associated with the sort of Stalinist style of architecture that comes in the 30s, which is very like if you took Art Deco and you like doubled it, like Art Deco squared, to the point that it's a little tacky. But like the idea of this era, like the constructivist era, is that they're rethinking what architecture can be, like that they're rethinking sort of the idea of what a revolutionary idea of architecture could be, like how do people live, what does this sort of like revolutionary system change about the way that people live, and what possibilities exist for new ideas about living. I mean, in architecture, the architecture sort of movements of the 20s had more contact with sort of the outside world than other kind of artistic mediums, or like what they would later in the 30s when the sort of things cut off. So they are kind of interacting with architectural styles outside of the Soviet Union. So you see some sort of similar styles in like France and elsewhere in Europe of sort of reimagining how people live and what kind of like communal forms of living can exist. And there's sort of a politics around these styles of architectures that aren't always Soviet exactly. Like the Bolsheviks themselves were not artists. They were people who were very focused on sort of being revolutionaries. So they didn't think about art very much. So what they liked was like,
Which is interesting because Marx did think about art a lot,
mm-hmm.
and and had pretty developed ideas about the relationship between art and the revolution, and it doesn't, I agree with you, it doesn't show up in Lenin's writing. And of course, Stalin's approach to artists was mostly to kill them.
I mean, yeah,
Um,
I mean, they both sort of had what you might think of as like 19th century bourgeois tastes. Like they would have the same taste that like I don't know, like an upper class Victorian would have. So they tended to like things that were easy to understand and that weren't like were representative and were similar to things from before. I mean, a lot of sort of the Stalinist style is that the idea is that it's supposed to make sense to like the dumbest worker. So it's like almost like the aesthetically like a Marvel movie. Like
right,
it's
right.
the lowest common denominator, easy to understand, simple, artistically not like particularly interesting because it's not supposed to be. For Lenin, it's just kind of like that's his tastes, and they didn't really control art until the 30s. They kind of let it do its own thing, even though it was often not really aligned with what they wanted. They would be like, "Can you make a statue of Marx?" And like the artist would be like, "But what is a statue? What if it wasn't of Marx? What if it was like a pile of garbage?" And they'd be like, "Please just make one of Marx."
What
So it's
but
not like, yeah.
but this is not 19th century looking. If I had to compare this to anything, it would be
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Italian Futurism, which is, of course, contemporary with this, but is associated with fascism.
Yeah, so it's constructivism and futurism and these sort of movements. I mean, I'm not an art historian, but they do sort of come from the same roots. Like there is a Soviet style of futurism as well that again is not exactly aligned with the Bolsheviks, though is on tends to be in the 20s sort of a fellow traveler, I guess. Like they are interested in the revolution. They are kind of working alongside the revolution, and the revolution is important to what they're thinking, and they're trying to create a sort of new idea, a revolutionary idea of culture that isn't exactly Bolshevik, but isn't exactly not. And so they have contact with other architects and other artists who are thinking through sort of changes related to modernism, who are rethinking what art can be, especially in the aftermath of World War One, where everything changed essentially, and I guess in the aftermath of the like invention of photography, where art has changed dramatically since then. So they're rethinking alongside other sort of European styles of architecture what architecture could possibly. Oh boy.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, while you're talking, I just so that people have a reference point about uh, Brezhnev era apartment blocks. I actually spent some time at these, not because I was interested in the architectural history of them, but because this is a neighborhood that has been really brutally shelled, and I wanted to give you guys a sense of some of what Emily's was talking about earlier. This is these are you can see both the very functional quality of it, but also that each of them has a little park, right? And there's a I was really kind of unduly fascinated by the contrast between destroyed buildings and playground equipment, some of it damaged and some of it not. But I will share these images to by way of highlighting, not by way of highlighting the damage again, but by highlighting way of highlighting Emily's point that um, about the nature of the architecture and the work that it is doing in terms of putting large numbers of people in homes, but also addressing addressing a bunch of other functional needs at the same time.
Yeah, which is different from this the 20s style, which is monument. Well, this late 20s style, which is becoming more monumental.
Right.
So I mean, the constructivists they were thinking about living, how people would live, but by the 30s they're building more monumentally. They're building more representatively, like sort of as a that's not the right word, but as a way of sort of building something enormous and beautiful often. I mean, a lot of Stalinist architecture is very beautiful, sort of overwhelmingly beautiful a lot of the time. But in the post-war era, the ugly architecture is being built for people. And that's, I think, a contrast that you see that this beautiful architecture is not housing people very often. And if it is housing people, it's housing the elite. Whereas this ugly architecture is creating homes that people live in, that families live in, that have space for children, that have space for private living and private spaces. And that's what I find sort of appealing about it is that it is this sort of, it is I think in a Soviet way, it's a very utopian idea that results in something very ugly. But there's
But
something there. There's
but
something.
you like the utopianism of it.
The
Um,
utopianism when it if it worked.
okay, so I want to ask you about. So you just buried a hot take, which is that the Stalinist architecture and the the Dershprom building that we just looked at is pre-Stalinist, of course. Um, but
And I mean the constructivist is my favorite stuff. I
right,
like
so
this reimagining. I
right,
like the diversity of it too.
that stuff is genuinely interesting. So I did not take pictures of Stalinist architecture, which of which there is more in Kiev actually than in Kharkiv. And the reason is that and this again goes to my own disgust for the way the Soviets did not protect um, uh, their own architectural legacy. So uh, in at the time that the Nazis came into Kiev, the Soviets bombed the entire main drag, which is Krchatek. Uh, every single building in it was destroyed by the Soviets themselves on their way out of town uh, it's kind of the scorched earth cities edition, right? And so after the war, Stalin rebuilds this avenue with one monumental piece of architecture after another. Most of them are now fancy department stores, and they're it's a weird combination of sort of Stalinism through the lens of modern capitalism, but I find them repugnant, and I am I think it's a it's an awful period, and I can't tell if that's an aesthetic judgment divorced from the murderousness of the regime and kind of what that period represented, or whether it's just an aesthetic judgment. So I was surprised just now to hear you use the word beautiful. So I'm going to find some pictures online of that avenue while Emily defends Stalinist monumentalism. And you guys will decide for yourselves whether whether her characterization or mine is the better one.
I mean, I think that you are not wrong that when you look at these buildings, you can hear that you're stepping on bones. Like you can tell that your feet are soaked in blood. Like there's some the sort of the size of them, the way that they're laid out, that they're like how you can tell that they were built in the era that they were built in. I think there are they are sort of overwhelming a lot of the time, especially the Stalinist skyscrapers are like overwhelming in that they're sort of aesthetically overwhelming. They're not like if you were an architect, I think you look at them and you go like, yeah, 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 more little frills on it, and but they are sort of they're built to be as sort of common denominator appealing as possible. They're like the kinds of like an exaggerated version of Art Deco to a degree that becomes kind of tacky, but is, I think, still the beauty of them is what makes them so kind of alarming. Like what you notice about them is that they're very beautiful and that they're associated with this period that's so violent that you kind of the contrast of them is what makes them kind of aesthetically hard to tolerate. But they are, I mean, people love them. They're often like the most expensive one. Like if you want to live in them, they cost a lot of money.
I mean, that's interesting. Is that just because the neighborhood is fashionable, or because I mean, it is sort of the downtown shopping strip, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But
they're often central, but they're also like, I think people find them more beautiful. And that's
that's
why they,
interesting. I find them, quite horrifying. I, so
I
talk
think
to
it's, I
me.
mean, it's not that different from how people feel about plantation architecture. That's a style of architecture that is absolutely soaked in blood that should be 100% disgusting. But people get married in those places.
Right,
It's like
which
this beauty that's papering over something so ugly is like, it's, I think a part of the ugliness is that the thing on top is beautiful. But that it isn't that strange to me that people see the beauty rather than what's ugly and under it. But they're both there.
yeah, I'm still trying to find a good collection of photos that really captures what the place looks like. And I'm actually not finding it, in part because some of the buildings are so big and so overwhelming that
Yeah.
it is actually hard to um, it's actually hard to describe what
Pictures never really capture it. I remember in Moscow, the first time I went to Moscow, like I was at Moscow State for a program, like a study abroad program, and the first place we went after the airport is we got out at Moscow State University, and I remember being like, "Am I even like sleep deprived after a long flight?" Getting out and being like, "How is this possible?" Like physics seems wrong because it's so big.
right. So this is uh an old department store. Um so in Soviet times there were these massive department stores, the most famous of which is of course GUM in Moscow, but there were but this is a kind of semi-typical example of what whoops of what is on this street. And I will run through a couple of others just to give you a sense of it. But um, uh, let's see. Um, yeah, so here's another one that, just these huge buildings that are, um, you know, that are designed to impress and to be um, and are really overwhelming. Um, this one is actually kind of elegant looking from this angle, but when you look at it from the front, it
Get a little tacky, yeah.
well, it really does give you this "if you don't like me, I'm going to kill you" vibe.
Yeah, it's an
A-
expression of power for sure.
yeah. Hello, Jonathan Rausch.
Hello. I thought we were
Do
talking
you have
about the
feelings?
FBI building in Washington.
Yeah, do you have feelings about Soviet architecture?
I only spent about 3 days in Moscow. Um, in the since I was staying in the embassy compound with a friend who worked there, the architecture I was most acquainted with was the Church of Our Lady of the Immaculate Reception, which was the church next door from which the Soviets and Russians monitored. It was their listening posts monitoring what was going on in the compound. Um, I did observe this. I think they're called the Seven Sisters, which are those seven immense Stalinist buildings, but I did not dare to approach one.
I lived in one for a while, so they're honestly kind of horrible to live in. They
Um,
don't have kitchens, and they're like, because you're supposed to eat communally, so it's like they have like this tiny little kitchen, and then they're so dark, and the ceilings are so low, and they're really small.
yeah, yeah, that's one thing about Soviet architecture in general, that it is not designed for, because it is so unmarket driven. It's not, it's about what bureaucrats decide people need, not about what actual people want. Um, it does have this quality of always being inconvenient. And I was really impressed by this when we were trying to buy batteries for people. And there's no backup systems for anything. So you bring a battery to a building, and if the elevator doesn't work, you're just fucked. There's no other elevator. There's no um
Sometimes there's no stairs.
and there, you would not want to be in one of these buildings in a fire. Uh so they're not designed at a human scale, and they're really not refined over time to be um, to be sort of useful to actual people. They're kind of visions um, of what somebody centrally thought everybody needed. Apparently not including kitchens. Um, all
Later
right,
ones have kitchens. So
what's that?
Stalinist ones, especially for the party elite, no kitchens. The later ones, they have kitchens.
So I
Well, they have a
want
kitchen. It's just like it's a boat kitchen is what it's called. So it's just like
like a
it's like,
galley.
yeah, it's like what you have in like a dorm.
All right, I want to share one more building again. This one not because is um, again, ignore the fact of its having been destroyed. Um, and again, here, I think the building itself is pretty ugly. The building is a sports complex, but the mosaic art on the outside of it is kind of amazing. And so I'm going to share this um, and again, I'm fascinated um, by the quality. Okay, so this is the building shot from a distance, and as you get close to it, you see it's a giant sports complex. You know, it's Soviet era, and it was built, you know, as part of the Soviet, you know, program to make sure they win all the Olympic medals, and they, you know, train people from very young ages. And so regional cities had these very developed sports complexes. So this is the ice skating rink. And it was destroyed in a Shahed attack early in the war. It will, I am told by local authorities, not be rebuilt or restored. The damage is too extensive. Both this facility and this one will be demolished entirely when they get around to it. All right. So that we will, ignore the architecture for a minute. The following two images. So the image closest to you is a banner hung up on a hole in the wall. So ignore that one, the one with the three ice skaters, the three hockey players. These next two, however, are images. These are mosaics that were uh, done by, I, I don't know when they date from because I don't know when the building dates from. But I found the building pretty horrible, and the mosaics. So here's the banner, and what this masks is just a hole in the wall where a missile went through, um, and and here's the side of the back side of the building, so you can see the bones of the building, but not. I think the building is not that interesting, but the mosaics are pretty fascinating and kind of a weird combination of what I expected Soviet mosaics to look like and nothing like what I expected them to look like. So talk to me about these mosaics and how how typical this is of what.
Oh, I mean, it is typical. I mean, they do have mosaics and they do look like this. I don't know what era this is actually, because it could kind of be like the combo of the two is
The
surprising.
mosaics look older than the building is what's weird. The building
I
looks
can't
like it.
imagine. I think the building is probably just poorly maintained.
Well, I mean, poorly maintained. It was hit by a freaking shad.
Yeah, that also is not. Yeah. Ugh. I mean, yeah, no, that it's not going to be rebuilt is so. There's so much the sort of cultural heritage of Ukraine just gone. This is so interesting and it's so sort of unique. And I don't actually know quite what era it is from. I mean, the mosaics are sort of a common part of building in the Soviet period. There was sort of a period of mosaics of the 30s, and then there's a sort of a period of mosaics of the 60s and 70s. And I would think I would guess that this is later, because
This
of the,
building looked 60 to me.
yeah, I would guess
Again,
it
I'm
was,
looking at we're looking at the skeleton of the building, not at the building itself, and I haven't pulled pics of it. But, if somebody wants to, it's the main hockey rink of Kharkiv, and if somebody wants to Google it right now and figure out what year it's from, uh, uh, my guess is it's 1965.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, sounds right. Yeah, it looks like sort of the later style of mosaics of the 60s and 70s, which are often more, include more sort of abstraction and I think are more interesting, and that they often celebrate individuals rather than sort of the elite, which is sort of ambiguous with a sports guy who sort of could be both, especially a guy holding a
right.
trophy. But this is if the in the era where they were really obsessed with the Olympics, that's the 60s and 70s.
So this
Um,
must be the 70s because I can tell this because of the nature of the hockey skates he's
oh,
wearing.
interesting. Yeah.
These are uh this is not a style of hockey skate that exists in the 50s or 40s.
Yeah, then probably the
Where
70s. Yeah.
um so I think it's like a 70s retro vibe thing going.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the sort of the arches, the complexity of it. 60, it was built in 60. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. 1960 post-war is what I would guess. Um, how do I
Yeah,
make this
so
thing?
it's late 50s, early 60s, so critically, I think post Stalin.
Post-Stalin, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, the sort of the decorative element of having a mosaic is a common way that sort of this kind of building would have been made beautiful. And you see the kind of often it's like a panorama of regular people who are sort of successful in some sort of Soviet way, like scientists often, um, going to space. There's a lot of mosaics of space. There's also in this era, there's a lot of mosaics of sort of like folk art, which could be some sort of the more abstract part could be trying to sort of evoke that style of like decorative painting in Ukraine.
So, all right, two views of this, and I did not collect a lot of opinion about this subject because I was talking to people about the war. But one is a kind of visceral hatred of all things Soviet architecture, and you hear this all the time that they destroyed a lot of Ukrainian buildings. It's part of the cultural genocide, and they replaced them with these monstrosities. Um, uh, and there is a love of things post independence and a love of things that are older, especially if they're not obviously imperialist in quality, right? There's a more complicated relationship with, you know, stuff that is really symbolic of the Russian Empire. But um, the other side of the equation, which is represented by Jimmy Rushton and you in this conversation, is hey, those mosaics were done by Ukrainian artists. They were done in under the auspices of the Soviet Union, but uh, there is something destructive about the urge to, the sort of physical lustration urge with respect to a century of the art architectural production of the place. Do you have a sense I mean, your engagement with Russia is um, more, do you have a sense in Russia of how people regard the Soviet era architecture? Is it regarded as part of a cultural legacy, or is it regarded as this this thing that we rip down a lot of buildings to build, the FBI Hoover building over.
I mean, yeah, it's honestly somewhat it's similar, which is that people often, I mean, I think that the difference is that people like the Russian Imperial and they like the Stalinist architecture quite a bit. Um, they don't like the late Soviet stuff as much. Um, they tend to get rid of that, tear it down as well, and they're building the things that are built now in Russia are in the monumental Stalinist style. Often worse because they're made of like contemporary materials and like glass, but they're the similar sort of huge, tacky, big. So that aspect is seen as kind of representing power and might and empire, and so they're seen positively, especially by the Putin regime, as representing what beauty is supposed to look like, is this sort of imperial style, this power style, this Stalinist monumental style. Um, I think that the aspect that I'm seeing as cultural heritage, especially in Ukraine, is that sort of the things that are unique and unique to Ukraine, and that those aren't always what people find beautiful necessarily, like those mosaics, but those mosaics are I'm Ukrainian artists. They are often, some of them have sort of like there's a way that people who were sort of putting in Ukrainian national symbols into things were sometimes doing so somewhat subversively. That you see things that look specifically Ukrainian are, or the things that represent Ukrainianness are targeted by Russia for reasons that they are Ukrainian cultural heritage. And that includes things like the sports center and, regular civilian housing, things like that are, I mean, obviously the people being targeted matters more, but that I think that targeting the architectural diversity of Ukraine,
Right.
it's sort of the ways, its history and its complexity and the different eras in which it was built and what it has looked like because of this sort of complex history, this sort of combination of these different styles of different eras are the thing that is one of the things that represents the cultural genocide that is being destroyed by Russia.
Jonathan, what is on your mind today? Did you come on to talk about Soviet architecture, or did you have no idea we were going to be talking about this today and just showed up because you showed up? Or did you have some other thing, agenda item that you wanted to talk about?
The FBI building?
I just I just showed up to see how you're doing and welcome you back.
Well, thank you. I am very jet lagged. I woke up at an obscene hour of the morning, and had trouble going back to sleep. And my head is very full of many things. But I am well, and uh, um, uh, I am well and very inspired in a lot of directions to do to do more stuff in more different areas of possible stuff doing.
Well, the battery exploit is inspiring.
Well, thank you. We cleared. We are about to clear $80,000, and and I again, the hardest part of this project, and by the way, this is a good thing, is moving tens of thousands of dollars from Washington to Ukraine. That's actually a hard thing to do, and I don't, I'm not sorry for that, because I think mostly if you stop some guy from sending $80,000 to some woman in Kiev, mostly what you're doing is you're inhibiting money laundering, and that's a good thing. But you're probably also inhibiting like sex trafficking and other terrible things. Um, in this case, you're inhibiting buying people batteries and blankets and stuff. And I'm not complaining about that, but I am you know, struck by how much it, it is actually the single thing that causes the most holdups. And, it's not getting batteries into Ukraine. It's not, getting heaters, getting the supplies are frickin' there, right? It's getting the money to getting the money that you have and that people, many of them associated with the audience of this show, have donated. It is physically getting the money. This is what I was working on the half hour before the show. How much money can I wire to Nastya without triggering, a like a hold on it, and the hold lasts for 5 days, right? And so if you find the exact amount below the level of the hold, then she can buy somebody a battery today. But if you go above that, it's like the price is right. Then you get fucked, and somebody has to wait 4 days. So it's aggravating, but it has been a really great experience, and actually being able to go and help deliver some of the batteries, um, which, by the way, I talked about Jimmy Rushton and the work he's doing as a reporter and a journalist there, but he also is the guy with the truck who delivers the batteries for Nastya, and going with him and Nastya to bring batteries to people it's a very moving experience.
So I've followed the situation on and off, haven't read every post, but here's the impression I've received from you and from others. First, the Ukrainians, even in the big cities now, are suffering from quite severe hardship.
Yes,
Second,
and are lying about it to diminish the hardship. Don't trust any Ukrainian who tells you I'm fine. It's other people I'm worrying about. They are when they say they're fine, they mean it's 45 degrees in their apartments.
so that's
And
that's number one. Second thing I think I've learned is that this is not having a material impact on their willingness to continue the fight.
correct.
Thus, it's failing if the Russian goal is to destroy their morale and their will to fight. Number
I think to an
three,
extent it's just to kill
spring
people.
will come. So it's unclear exactly what the Russians have accomplished here. Um, Four, the situation continues to be unsustainable and impossible, but no one knows how to end it. Is that all correct?
I think that is broadly speaking all correct, but each component of that involves a like you could have an hour or 2 hour conversation about each component of your chapter headings. That said, I don't I am I mean, look, the only Anne Applebaum has been making this point over and over and over again. Do you remember the great movie The Hustler with the very young Paul Newman, uh, and Jackie Gleason playing Minnesota Fats, and and they're playing straight pool for 28 hours straight, and um, and Paul Newman's manager keeps wanting him to end the game because he's way, way up. And he keeps saying the game is over when Minnesota Fats says it's over. He wants Minnesota Fats to acknowledge that he's been beat. Um, and there's something similar going on here. Like, you can kid yourself if you're Donald Trump that you can find a deal, right? But this game is over when Vladimir Putin says it's over. And there is no constellation of facts that makes him unable to continue the fight. What there what there is a constellation of facts that make him unable to continue the fight in a fashion that's even minimally productive. And we're fast approaching that point. I mean, the speed of Russian advance in, along the front is very, very slow, and they're killing very large number of their own people to make tiny, tiny marginal advances. But, as Gordon Liddy said about the pain associated with holding your hand over the flame, the trick is not minding, right? And he really doesn't give a shit. And so I don't think there is much. I don't see what the mechanism is by which, you know, Minnesota Fats says the game is over. And so I think the Ukrainian response to that is, um, you know, we need to dig in for the long haul. And by the way, we're not talking about 2 years ago, we were talking about, okay, the US will pump enough money and arms and stuff in so that a Ukrainian breakthrough could happen. That's not gonna, like, we're not talking about that anymore. We're talking about when and how and whether we're going to abandon them entirely, right? And we're in the extortion phase of this game in our relationship with them. So I don't think there's really any. Um, it's very hard for me to see how either side achieves a breakthrough.
And yet,
Um,
and yet we know that at some point something will change. But it appears that this is a situation of a ball balanced on a ledge, which could fall in any of a number of directions, and there's nothing to be done except await the contingency of history. Something will happen, but we don't know what it is. Is that approximately?
well,
I
I
mean, it's
don't.
headed.
Go ahead,
The
Emily.
I was gonna say that like there is no sort of victory condition for like whatever they claim to want. None of it is possible. It doesn't make sense. They want Ukraine to just not exist and not mind and for things like that to happen that can't ever happen. So there is sort of it's a matter of time before this fails for Russia, and it will fail in I think a catastrophic direction. It's just like what when how many people die before that happens is I think the question, and that there's ways to put pressure on Russia. There's more sanctions, that they're increasingly becoming kind of a vassal of China, which they don't want to be. Their things are making less sense. It's just that it's slow and it's not necessarily a concern yet. They're easily able to ignore what's happening, what the problem is, and it's immensely destructive to actual Russia. And at some point, the bill comes due, and at some point, everything that they're putting off until tomorrow will become a problem. And that will happen before Ukraine just sort of ceases to exist and everybody becomes Russians and they all acknowledge that Putin's insane version of history is true or whatever, because that isn't a thing that could ever happen.
Well, it seems to me that the key factor on Ukraine's side is its will to fight. Um, and that Putin is betting that at some point that will collapse. They'll have had enough, or their economy will be so weak, or so many people will have fled the country that they'll be unable to sustain the fight and just collapse. But I gather from Ben that that's not imminent. And I gather from you that it's never going to happen.
I mean, even in those circumstances, I don't think Ukraine will cease to be Ukraine. I don't think that could ever happen, that Ukraine would simply cease to be Ukraine. If like the absolute worst case is where the will to fight is diminished and people have to stop for a while, but even then they don't stop being Ukrainians, and that is still a fight against what Russia wants. It would still fail. They still can't do what they want to do. It's still just an impossibility. It was always sort of a stupid impossibility that makes no sense. It's just pure destruction, as much destruction as they can do.
We got to wrap, but I want to address a question that has come up in the chat, which is about the tax status of the $80,000 that people have sent me. I will say the following about it. My position is that I run a business, and that business is called Dog Shirt Daily. and every single one of those transactions is income to Dogshirt Daily, and every single one of the expenditures is a cost to Dogshirt Daily. And therefore, I expect Dogshirt Daily to have $80,000 of additional income and $80,000 of additional cost this year. And therefore, I expect that none of it will be taxable and none of it will be considered gifts. That said, if the IRS disagrees with me about this and I have to pay taxes on that money, bring it on. I'm okay with that. And I have actually have no, like, if they want to audit me and look at all the receipts and decide that this was income that I decided to spend this way, I will live with whatever the government decides in that regard. I do want to say to the IRS that I will publish every communication. If they take that position, I will make very clear, very publicly, that that is their position. Folks, we are going to wrap. We're going to be back tomorrow. We're going to be shifting gears over the next few days away from Ukraine and back toward the situation at home. Got a lot of stuff to talk about there, and I am slowly digging out and reacclimating myself to the horrific situation here, where we have our own brutalist buildings that we have complicated relationships with. And yes, Andrew, this so a couple things on the Mara Book Club. Sorry, we're running a couple minutes over. The Corey Shockey is joining the Mara Book Club on Sunday, and I will schedule the next couple of meetings of the Mara Mini Book Club to discuss Platonic dialogues with Andrew over the next couple weeks. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. Be well, stay cool, but not cold. Keep the faith and pray with a raised fist always.